Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, a podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. This show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative. This episode is sponsored by Police Mortgage. Police Mortgage is a full-service mortgage company dedicated to serving police officers and first responders. Founded in 2008, Police Mortgage offers a variety of mortgage products tailored to meet the needs of those who serve and protect. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and we are back here with Season 8 of Public Safety Talk Radio. And I'm really excited to start off with a fun one. We've got Stu Smith with us, who is the founder of Stu Smith Fitness. You can find him easily at StuSmithFitness.com, which is a fitness information company focused on fitness testing programs for entrance into military, special ops, police, and the firefighting communities. They have been in business since 1999, and he's only 25. Stu, welcome to the show. Maybe that last part wasn't correct.
Hey, thank you so much. This is awesome. I always look forward to talking to you guys. So,
well,
let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. And, here we are, the first episode of the season, and I'm already pissed because you're a year older than I am, and you have more hair, and you're in better shape. So,
well, it's amazing what a year will do.
Yeah.
So time to get started.
Exactly. So, the obvious question is, there's a ton of fitness companies out there, but how did you specifically fall into this category of helping folks get into law enforcement, military, firefighting, all that other thing? Why that particular niche?
Well, it goes back to when I was in, and when I first joined, actually, 1987, I joined the Navy via the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And, I went in there because I wanted to play football and be a pilot after I graduated. And I thought, this is awesome. I'm a football player. I was recruited. I can play football and I can be a pilot when I graduate. This is the awesome, this is what I wanted to do. And when I get there, I am not ready for what I'm about to go through. And I realized that. I spent all my time preparing to get to the academy. I didn't do any considerations whatsoever how I'm going to get through there and what I needed to do and where I needed to be physically, to get through there. And, long story short, I didn't become a pilot and I didn't play football and I failed my first fitness test and I, was failing out of chemistry by Thanksgiving. And, I go home and I was just like, I don't know what's going on. And I had an epiphany, so to speak, when my mom says, won't you just come home and quit? And I'm like, I can't quit. And then she was like, well, quit crying. Let's figure this out and, figure out what we need to do. And so that was kind of like the turning point of my story. But then throughout the next 4 years, I turned my stuff around. I actually graduate. I turned myself into a failing fitness test on that first week to, getting a slot to go into SEAL training, so spec ops level fitness. But all through that 4 years, I saw people who were failing swimming, failing the run, failing fitness tests. And I also saw the other end of the spectrum of people that were crushing it and doing far much more. Fast forward again, I go to the SEAL teams, finish SEAL training, go to the SEAL teams. There, I'm like really nailing down the high level of fitness. And I get an opportunity to go back to the Naval Academy as an instructor. And I worked in the PE department. I worked in ran the SEAL program while I was there as a company officer. And, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed coaching and being a part of both ends of that spectrum. So, every time you see something out there, sometimes it's, at least back then, this was in the 90s,
Right.
it was, kind of a beginner level fitness to get you prepared for this. There was nothing, on the spec ops level.
Mhm.
Um, so I saw a need for preparation training for both ends of that spectrum because there were people who were showing up at the academy. 10% of them couldn't pass the fitness test, which if you're bringing in 1,000 people, that's 100 people you have to
Right.
deal with and coach them up. And the best you can do sometimes is just coach them up to the minimum standard.
Hmm.
And coming from the community I was in, that didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So I was like, we got to go a little bit beyond this minimum standard and get us to a level that's actually functioning and working for the tactical professional.
Yeah.
And I got out a couple of years later, right around 99, 2000, and I started focusing on creating content and programming for both ends of that spectrum. And I've been doing it ever since.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting looking or hearing your story and looking back because we're about the same age. And after I got out of college, I first didn't really want to get into banking, which I ended up getting in anyway. I decided, hey, you know what? I'll just be a firefighter. And the ironic thing is, I trained on my own for that and passed all of the physical tests at all these different municipalities that were looking for firefighters. I passed those with flying colors, but I found out that I was stupid because I couldn't pass the written test. I got out of high school without having to take physics, and I'm like looking at this, and I'm like, what's this? Like 5 pulleys, and tell me that this rope is gonna move this way or that way. It's like, can I get back on the track or get back on the bench press? I could do that.
Yeah. Yeah, people don't realize that there's an academic process to
Yeah,
these jobs as well. And, once again, if you're not preparing
yeah,
yourself for all of that, you're setting yourself for, up for failure, or not meeting the standards,
yeah.
not being able to graduate, or injury if
Hmm.
you're really that bad out of shape. So it really matters in your preparation. And that's really what I focus on. I kind of focus on what I call phase 1 and
Hmm.
phase 2 of tactical fitness. Phase 1, you need to prepare specifically for that entrance exam, whatever
Hmm.
that is.
Right,
Your workouts need to look like pull-ups, push-ups, and sit-ups and running if that's what your fitness test is, right?
right.
And then you need to also prepare for phase 2 of tactical fitness, which is getting through the academy, the boot camp, the basic training, the spec ops selection, whatever that is. You need to start your preparation before you go in there because there's nothing in this process that's going to prepare you for both,
Yeah.
right? You have to be prepared when you hit these training programs.
Yeah, you make a great point is, especially, late teens, early 20s, like we were, trying to get into the Navy, me trying to get into a fire department. You're not really, hey, well, I'll just go and I'll just do it, not
Right.
thinking about, the entire process. And to your point on the physical side, I remember going to, did terrible on the written tests and probably the psychological too, but we're not going to get into that on this show. But I aced the physical ones, but even on those physical tests, I saw these other guys and a few gals. Yeah, so you'd have some that would, ace the running tests because a lot of them you had to run like a mile, so many times in a certain amount of time, and it's like, oh, that's okay. And you'd see people be able to do that, but then they'd get to the strength portion where they just had to lift their own body weight once, and you could see, they're struggling and they've got to use the spotter right away.
Sure.
Even to just do one, And then you have these guys that are muscle bound and, they could probably, crush everybody's head there. And, they're trying to show off with the body weight thing, doing 10 reps, and then they can't even make it one lap on the track because they didn't do any cardio. So, being prepared for the entire test,
Yes.
being ready physically, mentally, psychologically before you even get there, I would think, and you would know better, is so important.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
I try to make sure that there are no weaknesses left unresolved, right? And I have a
Mhm.
system of training that makes sure you're hitting strength, power, speed, agility, muscle stamina, endurance, multiple modes of endurance, depending on your job, and mobility, flexibility, grip. All of those things are critical, and you need to be good at all of them. You don't need to be great at any one of them. You just need to be good at all of them. And that's the difference where I think a lot of people fail is and succeed is they either neglect something or they don't, and they figure it out.
Are you looking for a podcast to answer some financial questions? Well, then check out the Mortgage Beat podcast, brought to you by Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. Mortgage Beat gives insight into the home loan process specifically for police officers, firefighters, and other public safety professionals. The podcast is hosted by Police Mortgage CEO John Aritos, who has decades of experience in the mortgage industry. Check out Mortgage Beat on Spotify today. This is a little bit off the cuff, but definitely important for our audience. You've been doing this for about a quarter of a century, and obviously you're working with people that want to get into the military, they want to be a police officer, they want to be a firefighter, or maybe some other first responder or military type role.
Sure.
I would assume, not having done anything except the firefighter way back when, that every minimum level of entry is different. Police officers need to
Oh yeah.
have different physical skills than, say, to go in the Navy and so forth. Can you talk a little bit how you adapt or have different trainings for the different professions that people want to go in? Like you need to do more running. You need to get on the bench press, that type of thing.
Well, yes, it usually depends on the job they're getting
Hmm.
ready to do primarily, but where they are when they start is probably even more important. And what their athletic history was drives how I create the rest of their programming before they leave. And what that means is, everybody, if you're an athlete, chances are you have some really good strengths in something. But
Probably some bad habits.
there's there's probably there's probably some neglected components of fitness that your sport did not worry about, like football. Lifting, strength, power, speed, and agility. There's no need for endurance. There's no need for running 5 miles or whatever, or swimming or um, even muscle stamina, high rep calisthenics. There's no need for that. And a lot of times the football players have problems with their muscle stamina and their endurance. That's where we have to focus on. So we don't even go to the weight room with those guys. We are focusing on calisthenics and cardio. For the endurance athletes that come in, runners, swimmers, you name it. Those guys are great with the cardio, no problems, crush it, unless they're swimmers. Swimmers usually aren't great runners because they've spent their whole life in zero gravity,
Right.
right? And they usually don't have very good upper body strength if they're runners. So we got to put some time in the weight room with them, get them stronger. They usually hit the calisthenics pretty well because they're kind of that endurance athlete that kind of can crush calisthenics pretty quickly. But their strength side, when we're putting on weight and lifting weight off the floor or putting weight in a backpack and load bearing activities, those are the more challenging ones for them. So we try to get them a little stronger. So it really kind of depends on your
Yeah.
athletic history and what you're trying to do, because some jobs are going to require a bigger strength component. Some jobs are going to require a more endurance component.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to get to one of the questions I told you about beforehand, because I'm really interested in it. It's my show, so I'll ask the questions,
Sure.
whether the audience cares or not. But you wrote an article, and actually this applies to a number of the 40, 50-year-old first responders that I know that still are they're at the end of their career, but they're still in the career,
Yeah.
is that mobility question.
Oh,
I saw the article on your website, that mobility is not just a warm-up cool down, it is the workout. And granted, all I do is, sit behind a desk and go speak and things of that nature. But when I go to the gym, my stretching usually is limited to, okay, I'm done, let's stretch a little bit, let's get the hell out of here. And I've heard this before from chiropractors, doctors, especially as it applies to me, is, yeah, it's great that you could do all this stuff from a strength standpoint, but at your age, which is 55, mobility and flexibility is a lot more important. Can you
oh,
speak
absolutely.
to that a little bit? Because you obviously have some expertise in that area.
Well, I'm going to tell you a story.
Please. I love
Okay.
stories. I'm usually the one that's telling the story. So
I'm
please
going to
go
tell you a
ahead.
story. 45-year-old me. This was 11 years ago. I was doing hard workouts with my young 20 somethings, who are preparing for spec ops stuff, and we were in a process of where we're ramping up our running each week, nice steady progression, 10-15% increase, but we're peaking. We're getting up there. And I don't know what it was that year, but things hurt. Hips hurt, knees hurt. I mean, it felt like my hips were bleeding almost every step
Mm,
I took. I mean, it just really felt bad. Something wasn't right. So I was like, guys, you guys go on the long run today. I'm gonna go hit the bike and elliptical. I think I need some non-impact stuff.
mm,
There's another kid that had shin splints, some 18-year-old kid that just started running had shin splints. I said, come with me. We're gonna figure this out and
sure.
try to work on it. And when I was 45, I realized real quick that the things that were hurting me was, yes, my volume of running was probably a little steep for what I was doing at the time and for my weight. Um, and but all the old aches and pains that I've had from contact sports, playing football and rugby in college, and then 8 years as in spec ops training and going through those jobs, they all started coming back. They were saying, "Hey, remember me? Remember
Yeah.
that shoulder that you stuck in the ground and it separated?" Everything was coming back and reminding me that something was hurt. And that is when I started playing around with a combination of non-impact cardio and simply yoga-based stretching,
Mhm.
right? Just some yoga poses, yoga stretching, and I did it a couple of ways first. I was like, let me try this 30-minute yoga class. Let me try this spin class. Both of those didn't really appeal to me. I didn't really enjoy just focusing on that for half an hour to an hour. And so what I did was I said, I like both of them because I feel pretty good afterwards. Let's mix the two together. And I came up with what I call Mobility Day.
Mm,
And this is a day of the week that is nothing but mobility and flexibility training, a little bit of cardio. So it's a 5-minute bike or elliptical, non impact focused cardio, followed by 5 minutes of stretching, foam rolling, massage tooling,
mm,
whatever you want to do for those 5 minutes. And you repeat that 5 times. So it takes
mhm.
50 minutes to an hour and you're out of there. And let me tell you, it the first time I did it, I was walking back to my car, and I know it was right after, so maybe it was an endorphin type thing, but
Yeah.
I didn't feel any pain. And it was the first time I hadn't felt pain walking, going down a curb, walking down steps, walking
Mhm.
up steps. The first time I hadn't felt pain in months. And I was like, okay, there's something to this. And so just to be safe, I didn't run for another week.
Mhm.
And all I did was that non-impact cardio, minutes stretching and foam rolling. And then I even created this little system where the first 5 minutes I worked on feet to knees, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for 5 minutes, I just focused on feet to knees. And then the next 5 minutes, I focus on knees to hips.
Mm-hmm.
The next 5 minutes, I focus on hips and lower back, right? Because I figured
Mm-hmm.
I needed to double focus my hips.
Mm-hmm.
And then next 5 minutes, I did the rest of my torso. Last 5 minutes, I did shoulders and arms. And so now that is what I do every middle of the week. And at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the week, I do 2 mobility days. I do one on Wednesday, I do one on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And completely life changing. And I will tell you this week already, I have run 12 miles. So Monday,
Mm-hmm.
Tuesday, I ran like 7 and 5. And then Wednesday, today, I did nothing. It's my mobility day.
Yeah.
And feel great for it. So that is how Mobility Day was created. And now for my 40 and over crowd, I usually
Mm-hmm.
just put it in there once a week. For my 50 and over crowd, I put it in there twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have programs now for the tactical athlete over 40, tactical athlete over 50. I call it the ageless athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And mobility days are structured into that week as just a training day.
Yeah.
And then the end of the days, like you said, the other days when I'm working legs or upper body, yeah, there's a little stretching routine on the back end, but nothing crazy, 10 minutes, and you call it a day. But that is how it works. And the reason why I like doing that now and why I created the whole 40 and over and 50 and over
Mm-hmm.
programming is that I've been doing this for 25 years. People that started with me 25 years ago are now 40 and 50 years old.
Right.
Right.
And
And
they're
so,
still with you, so that says something.
and I'm evolving with them
Yeah.
to understand that, we need a little more. Some of them are still active as well in their jobs, whether it's military, police, firefighters. And the one thing I want people to realize is you don't need to wait till 45 and in pain to start
Mm-hmm.
doing this. You can start it earlier. And because you need to realize you're going to be older longer than you are younger in this profession if you make it a career.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be nice to have your hips, knees, and ankles and shoulders working the way they're supposed to when you're in your 40s and 50s and still doing operational uh, day at your profession. Um, so it helps with adding that mobility day into your week. And the way I sold it to the young guys is I got 18, 20-year-olds doing this now, also in the middle of the week. Sometimes I'll let them go run for like half
Mm-hmm.
an hour and then come in, right? And then we'll do mobility day just because they need to work on their running. They're not feeling any pain because they're 18.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes their swimming and treading skills that they need to do, especially if they're going into like a diver program or
Mm-hmm.
SEAL or recon type stuff where there's a lot of swimming. You know, hips, knees, and ankles need to be mobile so they can swim with fins and tread water. Shoulders need to be mobile so they can
Mm-hmm.
glide through the water a little smoother and not look like a plow. Look, gliding like
I
this.
just got the visual on that,
Yeah,
but anyway, I'll continue.
yeah, you want to look like a torpedo in the water, not like a plow, because you can't straighten your arms over your head. So yeah, hips, knees, and ankles and shoulders are meant to be more mobile than they are, um, even for the young kids. And a lot of times I've fixed people's treading not by teaching them how to tread,
Mm-hmm.
but by adding some range of motion on their hips, knees, and ankles. So it's paid itself for young and old all over. So that's why it's part of the workout.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful. From a couple of different angles. One, yeah, we have a lot of talk on mental fitness and PTSD on the show, and we talk about cumulative trauma. And one of the things that we've been remiss in talking about, and I certainly know about this, is cumulative trauma. I was never, a top athlete. I was never a first responder, but, I ran for several years. I played a lot of basketball in my late teens, leagues in my 20s and early 30s. And then literally, one day when I was 45, about 10 years ago, I literally couldn't walk a half a block. Yeah, I just
Mm,
woke up and it was a back issue and it was cumulative trauma and so forth to, long story short, doctors have told me I can't run anymore. So, and I get bored really easily. So what I do is kind of like a circuit training. I'll do
yep.
non-impact cardio like an elliptical or a bike or something like that, and then I'll go do bench press. And
Yeah,
then and
it's
then
great.
I'll get on a stationary bike, and then I'll do legs. And then bouncing around,
Same.
keeps my heart rate up and keeps me interested enough where I'm not completely bored. So that idea that you talked about in the mobility of doing, I could do 5 minutes, even though
Yeah.
all I'm doing is looking at a wall, maybe I could do 5 minutes of that. Half hour, not so much.
Yes, I would agree. Yeah, and I think that was part of my problem too. I just, sitting through a yoga class for an hour was like I was like thinking of 10 things that I needed to be doing,
Hmm.
besides this. And yeah, so
That's why I can't meditate much anymore. You sit there for 10 minutes, like, for 9 minutes of it, I could be doing this.
yeah. Well, it's funny. My wife was telling me, I told my wife the other day I was going to try to meditate. And so if you see me, you know,
How,
relaxing in
how long
the
did it
living
take
room.
her to finish laughing?
Well, no, she wasn't laughing. She goes, "Oh, okay, I won't bother you." And and then she walks by and she says, "Well, I thought you guys were meditating, but you and the dog were both snoring, so I don't think you were meditating anymore." So
Well,
that's
the
what.
dog just had its
Yeah, he
own
was. I was on
different
the floor
meditation.
laying with him, and he was laying next to me, and we just started snoring. So we're out.
I,
Guess I
I,
needed it.
yeah, exactly. Sometimes you just need a 10-minute nap, I guess. I want to get to your podcast, but I want to hit on one point that you kind of alluded to a little bit that we've talked about on this show before. I've had some other fitness instructors that have come from police, fire, military before, and they're not as nice as you when it comes to the 40s and 50s. They basically say if you're on the job and you're out of shape, you're not only a detriment to yourself, you're a danger to everybody around you. When there's a fire, when there's a SWAT activity, when there's an actual critical incident. If you're not in the best physical shape, if you're 49, 449, you're a detriment to everybody else. Can you speak to that a little bit of the importance of being, I guess, the best you could be at the age you are?
Yes. In fact, they're not wrong.
Hmm.
I will just start there. Yes, I may be nice, but I'm also very pragmatic in a way that you're either one of two things, right? You're either an asset
Hmm.
on that fireground or wherever you are operating, or you're a liability. There's not much in between,
Yeah.
right? You're either to handle business of your own, be able to take care of yourself, or you're going and be able to help others, or you are unable to take care of yourself and someone else has to help you and you're incapable of helping others. So, yeah, that's how important it is, because I have always said tactical fitness is really the common denominator really is that you have to keep moving. Motion is lotion.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you get stiff, you get weak, and none of those things are valuable, to being the public servant that you want to be and you want to
Hmm.
be helpful. I mean, you wouldn't have gone into public service if you didn't want to help people in the first place. The fact that you are no longer an asset to be able to do that, is dangerous, just like you said.
Yeah.
So, I wish there was an easier way to say that, but
Yeah.
it really does come down to that. But the cool part about, even if you aren't an asset today,
Hmm.
is a few months makes a huge difference,
Yeah.
right? A year is life changing, right? You can go from liability to asset in
Quickly.
less than a year,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And turn your life around and turn your own health and wellness around as well. Because chances are, if you're not an asset on the fire ground, chances are you're probably not, having the healthiest of blood work
Hmm.
being done on you, and you're not far from metabolic syndrome, or you're not far from diabetes and
Yeah.
heart disease and stroke, heart attacks, which occur very commonly amongst the firefighter, because it's a stressful job. So you need to be in a fitness condition to handle that kind of stress,
Yeah.
physical and emotional, because the more you are capable physically of handling the stress that comes with the job, the better you are at metabolizing some of that stress so it doesn't become chronic and affect you mentally, and psychologically, as well.
Yeah. No, that's spot on. Again, was never a first responder myself, but I could say honestly, especially for anybody watching or listening to this that may be in their late 40s or early 50s and may not be in the physical shape that they'd like. I at 55, I feel like I am in much better shape and feel much better than I was at 45.
That's good.
And while the cumulative trauma certainly had something to do with it, but drinking 8 to 15 drinks,
Yeah.
a day sometimes, and not eating very well, I'm sure, helped sure helped my back quite a bit with the extra pounds that it was carrying along. So you can feel better at 55 than you were at 45.
I
Just keep
promise
looking.
you can. I promise you can.
So let's get to your podcast. You have a podcast called the Tactical Fitness Report, if I
Yeah.
remember that correctly. Yeah,
Yep.
how you offer a lot of things. Obviously, the one-on-one coaching, your classes, books, articles. How does the podcast fit into, all of your offerings in helping out first responders in the military?
Well, I started this, like I said, in 2000, roughly 2000,
Hmm.
with my first ebook coming out like in 2003. Um, and the evolution of technology made it happen, right? I mean, just think about us being able to do this right now,
Hmm.
did not exist in 2000.
Not easily, no.
Right. It was not even, yeah, it was not even on my radar
Hmm.
to have a podcast. The word podcast wasn't even invented. So it just started happening. And then I remember I was, doing videos for YouTube, and I, writing articles and sending out newsletters. And I finally just thought, you know what? I need to do a podcast, and I don't know what that podcast is going to look like. I just started talking. And basically, what I did is I've been writing articles for years, 3 a week probably for 25 years now. But I had pretty good database of articles, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to just take an article and talk about it.
Sure.
And that's what my podcasts really were. And then I bring a guest on, and we talk about, the topic that we were going to discuss, which was, tactical fitness related. And um, and then I started bringing on, other guys that were involved in fitness as well in some other capacity, and we compare, like, athletics and industrial, the term industrial athlete even,
Sure.
and um, and just talk about the pros and cons of both, where we see strengths and weaknesses and how to get better. So it just turned into a discussion, just not unlike what you and I are doing right now, just with a specific topic that related to people in the military, law enforcement, firefighters, special ops, a lot of special ops, because that's what tends to, for us, like I have a lot of spec ops guys come on and we talk about their journey. I started doing this another side to the podcast. I call it two through and after, which is
Mhm.
kind of a play on words. Remember me saying phase one and phase two of tactical fitness? You get to the training, you get through the training,
Mhm.
and then after the training, you're now an operator. You got to maintain your fitness. So that's kind of phase three.
Yeah.
So two through and after is just a play on words on that. But I was also doing it and just talking about people's history. Like, what were you doing before you decided to go into service? What'd you do to prepare? What'd you do going through SEAL training or whatever spec ops training they were doing? And then, what'd you do as an operator and what are you doing now?
Mhm.
So it has evolved into so many different little things. Now I do a live Q&A every Monday and Tuesday and post those up as podcasts, and
Mhm.
it's a lot of fun. It just
Nice.
gets me a way to get to my listeners that and readers that aren't always just articles and books.
Mhm.
It's a way for my people who buy my books can ask me a question about the books too, other
Yeah.
than email. You can always email me
Right.
as well. Yeah.
So, as we kind of begin to wrap up, I could, probably ask you another 10 questions if for no other reason for my own freaking fitness. But, but yeah, as we begin to wrap up a little bit, if there's, let's do two scenarios. Let's do the first one because, most of my audience are on the job. If there's somebody that's a police officer, somebody that's a firefighter that maybe are of the age of you and I, or maybe a little younger in their 40s, and are like, yeah, I can't quite do it like I used to. Maybe, I need to do something, and maybe I need a little help, and I need a little help from a guy named Stu. What is the best place to start? Your podcast, your articles, jump in the training with you, talk to you on the phone, knock on the door of your house and, sit down for a while. What's the best place for that person to start?
Well, it depends. If you like to listen to me talk or people talk and put it on audio and just have it playing in the background, that's cool. You could read it. A lot of times I'll put the embedded videos into my articles to just, have them say, hey, we talked about this for an hour. If you want more information, check out the podcast,
Mhm.
after I explain it in the articles. Um, but, to be honest with you, I would
Mhm.
say, um, we just want to get people to start doing something.
Right.
And however that is, I try to help them figure that out.
Hmm.
Right. And depending on their abilities, their facilities, their athletic history, their goals, whatever that is, I tend to do that through my online coaching.
Hmm.
But, you know, that comes with a cost.
Right.
And also have books that are more generic programs that you can personalize to fit your programming. And then the articles and the videos that I make with the podcast, they're just extras. They're
Hmm.
just extra ways to pick up something. A lot of times, I can talk about things like you and I are talking that I didn't put into an article,
Hmm.
right? You know, any little thing that sometimes just comes out that I neglected to write about.
Sure.
So I think there's any one way. It really depends on how you learn best.
Yeah.
How do you like to get your information? Do you like to get it through video? Do you like to get it through audio? Do you prefer reading it? That's where I think people in business now, I think they almost have to be their own media company first. And
Hmm.
I mean multimedia company, like even real estate agents. You know, you're not a real estate agent that sells housing.
Hmm.
You're a media company that's a real estate agent.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you have to have all forms of content available for people to find you these days. And
Yeah.
that's really what it's for. It's for, just ways to find me, and you kind of figure out how you want to best consume that information.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is spot on. Start somewhere. in the consulting that I do with businesses, especially ones that are not as healthy as we would
Yeah.
like financially or branding or marketing wise, is a lot of times they like to talk about what they can't do. And it's like, all right, well, let's talk about what you can do, and let's do that first thing. Let's
Yeah.
forget about everything else, because if we do this, at least we're moving in the right direction. And maybe that is listening to your podcast. Maybe that is just doing some stretching and walking or whatever, something.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, the other thing that, I notice in, this is not meant to get into politics, but, the fact here in 2025 is military recruits are going up, thankfully. I'm hoping that that'll happen, in the law enforcement community as well, just given the zeitgeist of our country now. So for those folks that are in their late teens, early 20s, that are thinking, hey, you know what? This college thing isn't all that great or what I really want to do. All of a sudden, the Navy or the Army sounds pretty good. Or, you know what? I don't want to be a mechanic anymore. I'm healthy enough. I want to go into law enforcement. What's their first step, Stu?
Good question. My advice is, once again, there's three phases that really mean a lot to the person thinking about serving,
Hmm.
right? You have to pass a fitness test to get accepted. Look at what that is and start preparing for that fitness test. I have written about all fitness tests in the United States for decades now. I'm sure you could find it on my page. Or you could just understand that your workouts need to look like pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, and a mile and a half run right now. Right? It doesn't take long to get good at those, to be able to pass the standards. And then you need to look at what's next.
Hmm.
Phase two of that may mean you're going to be wearing added weight on your body. So you need to get a little stronger. You're going to be walking up and down stairs with this weight. So put a weight vest on and go up a stair stepper as part
Hmm.
of your workout. Start preparing for what your academy is going to look like. Um, and then, once you graduate, you need to maintain that level of fitness so you can do your job
Hmm.
and be better able to handle stress. Because once again, you're going to be older longer than you are younger in this job if you stick around long enough, and you need to learn how to master recovery for two reasons. Mastering recovery means eating right, sleeping right, and that can be hard with shift work. You still have to figure that out each
Hmm.
day and understand what best works for you in that daytime sleeping when you do that. And then, smart workouts and hydration all come into play on how best you recover from today's stress that prepares you for tomorrow's activities, right? And that's for two things. Recovery is, you need to master recovery for not only human performance now and optimal performance, but you need to do it for longevity as well.
Sure.
Because if you're not mastering any of those, you're not seeing optimal performance and you're not building into that savings account that is longevity in your profession.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's great insight. This has been not only a really educational conversation for me, but also super fun. As I
cool.
said, I could talk to you for another hour, but let's wrap it up here. And we always reserve the right to bring you back.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the last question that I have for you, which is the most important for those folks out there, regardless of where they are in this stage, maybe towards the end of the career, at the beginning of the career, somewhere in the middle, that have listened or watched and said, you know what, I really need Stu's help. How best can they find you?
Best way to do is just go to Stu Smith Fitness, and I spell Stu like the soup, STEW, SMITH, fitness.com. But I'm all over social media as well. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, um, YouTube, Facebook. I'm on all of them.
MySpace?
Yeah, you know what?
Probably
Way back
in the
when
day.
I tried MySpace way back when. I remember that. Yeah, so that was when I started realizing I needed to start evolving my business with technology,
Right.
and it has just kept evolving as technology's evolving.
Yes, us old guys or older guys are probably the only ones that remember MySpace. But
Yeah.
Stu, thanks for taking a bunch of time with us today and sharing a lot of your knowledge. It was so much fun.
Thank you very much, Kenneth.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio. And we'll be back with you next week with another great guest.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. The POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.